Welcome to Real Estate from the Trenches. I'm your host, Dennis Norman. Today I'm going to talk briefly about the NAR settlement of the commission suits that you've probably heard about that just happened in the past couple of days, and give a kind of a high-level look at what agents need to know about this. So before I get started, though, quick disclaimer on the screen. There's a lot of stuff there, but basically it just says I'm not an attorney and this is not legal advice. And while I'm a real estate broker, I'm not your broker. So this is for informational and educational purposes only. As you're probably aware, this all started about 5 years ago, and what I mean by this, all the litigation that has led up to this settlement. There were two primary suits that have gotten most of the attention. The Sitzer suit that was filed in Missouri in 2019. Later, Sitzer was replaced by Burnett, so you might have heard it referred to as the Burnett suit. And the other one is the Morrell suit that was filed also in 2019 in Illinois. And basically what's at the center of these suits, and pretty much the common theme among most of the litigation that's out there, because there's about 12.5 suits now pending. But what's at the center is what they're referring to as the adversary commission rule, which has to do with NAR's policy that you're familiar with, I'm sure, that has required that all listings that go into the MLS, that one condition is to offer, make a unilateral offer of cooperation and compensation to a buyer's agent. And that has been what is at the center of these suits. Briefly, some of the claims and allegations that have been made in these suits basically are that rule, that NAR's rule to make that offer, that unilateral offer of compensation to a buyer's agent, and require it of a seller as a condition to having their listing in the MLS, that has resulted in the sellers paying a cost that they allege that in a competitive market, if it weren't for NAR's rule and the anti-competitive restraint by that rule, that is something that would not have been paid by the buyer. And then they also made an allegation that because the sellers are forced to pay a buyer's agent commission, and the commission goes into the MLS and is known, and publicly available, basically, or not publicly, but available to agents, that they've also alleged that most buyer brokers, I believe is a term they used, will not show homes to their clients where the seller is not offering buyer agent compensation that they feel is adequate, and that the buyer's agents give priority to listings with higher payouts. This is referred to as steering in the lawsuit, and it has been referred to as steering in a lot of commentary I've heard about the suits from the media and news outlets. So those are pretty much the main allegations. Now, the settlement agreement between NAR and the plaintiffs, which I should start with a caveat. The settlement agreement that you see on the screen, at the time I'm filming this, this settlement agreement has not even been filed in the courts yet. Now, it has been agreed to, signed by the parties, but it hasn't even been filed in the courts, so it's got a long way to go. It still has to be approved by the courts. There's still an opportunity for other interested parties, such as the DOJ, to intervene and give their opinion of it, just like the DOJ has done with the MLS PIN suit. And I'm not going to go down that rabbit trail. But anyway, this is a long way from final, and it could be subject to a lot of change. But I'm going to discuss how it stands right now, and with the assumption that most of the parties are on board, outside of the ones that signed it, who are clearly on board, and that maybe it'll happen. But basically, NAR has reached a settlement that is aiming to resolve all the ongoing litigation surrounding broker commissions. And this settlement covers a wide range of parties. And while my statements are going to be kind of general, nothing's 100% in this settlement, and we could spend hours here drilling down the details. But basically, the settlement pretty much covers most of the sellers out there across the country that sold their homes during the specified date periods or date ranges, and used any broker, and in some cases even a non-realtor broker that had their listing in an MLS, and subsequently had their listing in an MLS, and offered a buyer's agent commission. So it's pretty broad reaching. And so the release also covers a wide range of defendants. So NAR, most, if not all, state associations, most local associations, most MLSs that are owned by associations, and most realtors and agents. Now, there's a couple of caveats they've put in there, or exceptions, if you will. For example, real estate brokerages that had more than $2 billion in volume are going to have to pony up to be part of this. And then Berkshire Hathaway, they were left out altogether. And so now Berkshire's got, other things filed and motions filed, based upon some arbitration clauses and things in their suits. But anyway, a pretty wide net has been cast with this settlement agreement. And if it goes forward like it is, the majority of us all out there will be covered. And the cost of this release. Let me back up here. Now on the screen, you'll see I've gotten to the part of the settlement that shows the dates that are covered as far as sellers that sold after a date. And it varies depending upon where you are. But most of the earliest dates, like the ones that were involved, the plaintiffs and the class on the Burnett suit, it goes back to 2014, some of them 2015, 16. If you're in Arkansas, Kentucky, Missouri, and not in the, weren't part of the Morrell or Sitzer suit, then it's March or 2018. So it kind of varies, but in any event, covers a lot of years. And you'll see the sum that was paid for this, or is being paid for this settlement, is $418 million by NAR. Now, this sounds like a lot of money. First off, as I put on the screen here, before your sellers get all giddy and think they're getting a big check, if you kind of do some math, if you look at all the sales that are covered here, I mean, we're talking about, again, it varies from as much as almost 10 years of sales to maybe as little as 8 years of sales, but let's just say 40 million homes sold during that period. But then a bunch of those homes are not part of this settlement because Remax, Anywhere, and Keller Williams have reached their own settlements that are pending on these suits. So NAR's settlement doesn't cover those sellers. So even if we take half of these properties out and say they're covered by those other settlements, let's say it leaves 20 million properties, and then out of this 418 million, the attorneys get a swath off the top, and they've got a boatload of expenses, and the lead plaintiffs get, but a bigger chunk. But even if we say all that only amounts to 30%, and so that leaves 292 million to be divided among the 20 million homeowners, it's about $14. So I would tell you, when you're talking to your sellers, and they're all excited thinking they may be getting a check, or I would point out to them that it probably won't be a life-changing amount. So anyway, and to put it in perspective, I mean, this is kind of a bargain in a way, because the Sitzer suit settlement, or I'm sorry, judgment, was from that case, because that case, as probably most of you are aware, was decided October 31st, 2023, so a few months ago. And the jury awarded a $1.8 billion award, and that gets trebled because this is antitrust, so that becomes $5.4 billion. And so, NAR is settling that suit along with the Morrell suit and everything else they've wrapped into this for $418 million. Now, And also 418 million from the last return I looked at from NAR. I believe their total assets were about 700 or 750 million dollars. So this is a good chunk of it. It's over half their net worth, if you will. So it's a lot of money. Again, not going to trickle down to too much for sellers. Now, the part of the settlement agreement it includes some changes to practices that have to happen. So in addition to the money, their NAR is agreeing to several changes in how transactions are handled, specifically with buyers. So basically what is going to have to be done to comply with this is NAR is going to has agreed to eliminate the obligation for sellers or the listing brokerage to offer compensation to a buyer's agent to be in the MLS. In fact, they're going to go one step further from not requiring it, because right now, as you know, you're not required to make an offer of compensation anyway. NAR changed that rule a little while back after the suits, and even prior to their rule change, all that had to be offered, if you offered a penny or a dollar, you complied with it. So this isn't a dramatic change, but now they're just saying, yep, sellers no longer have to offer anything. Okay, so that's kind of a nothing burger. But then they're also changing the rule to not allow MLSs to address compensation at all. So the buyer agent, transaction agent, all those fields are going to be gone from the MLS. And you can't put comments, even in agent remarks or anything else about buyer compensation. I'm sorry, a buyer agent compensation. So basically, NAR has agreed to take the MLSs out of the buyer agent commission business, so to speak. So they're just staying out of it. So that's one of the things they had to agree to. And then NAR has agreed that they're going to make a requirement for written agreements to be done between buyers and their brokers, and that these written agreement has to stipulate what the broker's compensation is going to be and how it's going to get paid. Now, I don't know about you, but that one's kind of a head scratcher for me, because I think it's called the buyer's agency agreement, and they've been in existence for a long time. And again, this may change from market to market, but the market I'm in the St. Louis metro area, and the other markets I'm familiar with in Illinois and Arkansas and Kansas and around us, every buyer's agency agreement I've seen addresses compensation. And I know in our firm we've taught it for years that, I mean, our agents and good agents out there all over, wouldn't start. You can't represent a buyer without a buyer's agency agreement. Now, there are states like in Illinois, you're assumed to be a buyer's agent, but even there, in states like that, if you're assumed to be a buyer agent, good buyer's agents already are getting an agreement signed, because again, they want to be clear on what their obligations are and what's expected of each party and compensation. So anyway, buyer's agents agreements are going to be required, and the compensation has to be in there. Here's another whopper. So NAR has agreed that buyer's agents cannot represent their services are free. That's already in existence too. I think it's don't hold me to this. I think in 2021 is when NAR finally changed that rule. Personally, and I think a lot of people agree with me, as a broker in our firm and more realtors in St. Louis, I have told agents for as long as I can remember buyer's agents not to tell buyers your services are free, because they're not. You may not be there. You might be able to be. You could carefully word it and say my services aren't going to cost you anything directly out of pocket to me, or some weird thing like that. But I'm a big fan of transparency, and it's like, they're not free. You're getting paid indirectly, or from the seller, so indirectly from the buyer. Plus, forget that part. My big issue with telling agents you're free is, what does that put your value at? I wouldn't want to be a professional that is, if the only way I can get you to do business with me is, instead of showing you what I'm going to do for you and how I'm going to represent you and why you need me and all this stuff, I'm going to just go, oh, well, I'm free. I don't cost you anything. So what do you get to lose? I mean, that's embarrassing. So I don't know. That was, has been gone since 21. So that's the other thing. And there's a limitation on here. Let me scroll down to that. I found this interesting too. Basically, these pages just cover what I just covered. But here's the interesting part: is this agreement only lasts 7 years. So at the end of 7 years, what NAR's agreed to goes away again, as written. So that's the high level view of that. So because of this, what's going to change with your seller clients? How do things change with your sellers going forward? Not much. I mean, like I described with the overview of the settlement, I think the only thing that changes is nothing. I mean, I shouldn't say that. There's some mechanics that change, but before, I'm sure you were telling them they don't have to offer the buyer's agent any commission because they didn't have to offer anything. And so you're going to tell them that again. And there are a couple of little nuances now. If they do choose, and they can offer it, it's not like they're prohibited at this point from offering it. So if they do choose to offer it, they can. And there will be an extra disclosure put in there to make it very clear that these are not, the commissions are not set and all this stuff. So there'll be a couple little, procedural changes, but there won't be a big change on the seller side. I mean, what's going to probably be the biggest change on the seller side is that, since it's not the commission you're offering to pay out to a buyer's agent, if you are, is not going to be in the MLS. The biggest change is going to be how that gets communicated. So that's about it on the seller side. On the buyer clients, there'll be more changes on the buyer side. Now, if I guess for some people or some agents out there, having to have a buyer's agency agreement to work with a buyer as a buyer's agent, if that's a new thing, then I guess that's a change. But for most agents, that's not a change. If having to put an amount for compensation that you expect to receive, whether it's a percentage or a flat amount or however you charge, if having to put that in a buyer's agency agreement is different than how you've done before, then that's a new thing. Now, again, in our firm and in my coaching, I've taught that for years, and our agents do that, already. So not a real big change there. And again, assuming you haven't been walking around telling people you work for free, which for the last 3 years, that's been against NAR's rules anyway, that's not a change. So there's not a lot of changes there on the buyer side. Probably the biggest change is going to be is even if you've been doing this, even if you've had buyer's agency agreements and they've had minimums in them or set amounts, it's probably, my guess would be, there's going to be more instances where that's going to come into play. Because as there's more transparency and more attention on all this stuff, there may very well be more sellers that choose not to offer a buyer's agent commission. And so there may be more just more occasions where you were looking to the buyer for payment. And again, I realize there's a little difference. It's easier to write in a minimum commission, or I should say it's easier, but writing in a minimum commission in a buyer's agency agreement when you know the likelihood of having to actually obtain that from the buyer, that's pretty easy. Or if the worst case is you put in a minimum of X percentage and what you get paid was 0.3% less, and all you're going to them for is 0.3%. That's certainly easier than going to them for the whole amount. So there are going to be changes in that, and yes, they'll how that's going to work with lenders and all that. We're going to see those changes come. There'll be more on that, but right now we don't know where that's going to go. But again, not a dramatic thing. There's this fear that buyers aren't going to use agents, and while I don't have a crystal ball and I can't see the future, what I would suggest, I'm a big advocate for data and facts, and I'm also a big proponent of looking at history. What's happened with similar things, and a very similar thing is the seller side of it. Ever since the internet, I remember when the internet came out and suits and sites started, there was a big fear that sellers, they don't need listing agents anymore. They can put their house up on the internet. They can sell their house. FSBOs are going to run wild. And if you look at those charts from NAR and the profile of home buyers and sellers, the percentage that use an agent to sell their home, it's boring. The chart is actually boring. If you look at like a 20-year period of it, the line doesn't move that much. It's still over, I think it's 92% or 93%. So, sellers haven't opted to go that, down that path without an agent yet. So just because there's some change here, I don't think buyers, there's going to be that dramatic of a change. So there's that. Now, what is going to change with real estate agents? I didn't say there aren't going to be any changes. I do think what's going to happen is I think now good agents, knowledgeable agents, all those agents out there, probably like everybody watching this video, that care enough about the profession, your profession, the industry, to try to gain knowledge, to try to stay on top of things. Good agents that know what they're doing, that understand their fiduciary obligations to buyers, that represent their buyers, put their buyers' interest ahead of everything, put their buyers' interest ahead of their interest or their relationship with the listing agent, all that. Good agents, I don't think you're going to have a problem. Now, weak agents, agents that aren't representing their clients, that can't justify their worth, that, if me as a buyer, if I ask you, well, wait a minute, you're going to cost me what are you going to do for $9,000 or whatever this commission is? Those agents that can't give me an answer, a real compelling answer, and make me feel like I'm getting good value for it, well, they're going to have a real problem. But the good agents won't have any problem explaining that and defending it. So I do think there'll be a change, within the industry, and there's going to be those agents out there that just don't want to change. They want to hang on to the past. And I would just encourage you. I mean, heck, I've been in this business 40-something years, getting a little older, and I welcome changes. And in our firm, we talk about that. There are opportunities. So anyway, I would look at them as opportunities, but I do think there'll be some changes within the industry, but for the better, though. I mean, quite frankly, if those agents that are not really committed to mastering their profession, that aren't committed to doing business the best they can, and being the most knowledgeable person they can, and delivering great value to a client, if they go away, that just raises the level of professionalism in our business. So that's my take for now. And if you, I thank you for being here. If you found this information, informative and helpful, I'd really appreciate it if you share it, give it a like, and subscribe so you can see more content like this. Also, feel free to leave me a comment below if you have questions or suggestions for other content, or you'd like to connect and talk real estate. Thank you. God bless you.